Hello. It's a lovely day, and I am on my boat, and I'm on my holidays. And as part of my holidays, I have come to the lovely town of Leamington Spa. Now, since Leamington Spa and Warwick are effectively the same place, and I have an electric bike, and I'm only about 3 miles away, and my washing is drying, I think it would be a great idea if we went and had a look at the Saltisford Arm. Let's go up there and we'll explain what's going on. Right, here we are on the Grand Union Canal, and we're going to go and take a look at the Saltisford Arm. Now look, there are various arms on the Grand Union Canal that sort of branch off from the Grand Union Canal and, go nowhere and went to a wharf at one point. And I suppose there's no reason to think that the Saltisford Arm is any other, excepting that this is Budbrook Junction. That little bit going off to the right isn't the arm. That is the Grand Union Canal. The arm is behind us. So I guess that requires a closer look and a tiny little bit of history. Okay, so the Saltisford Arm is in fact not an arm. Let me explain. The Grand Union Canal was not built as the Grand Union Canal. It was built as several different canals, which were then all bought by the Regent's Canal, an incredibly short canal in central London, and tied together into the Grand Union. The Grand Junction ran from London up to Braunston, and there was a chunk of about 5 miles of the Oxford Canal ran from Braunston to Knapton Junction, and then the Warwick and Knapton Canal ran up to where we just were at Budbrook Junction, and then the Warwick and Birmingham Canal ran from Warwick up to Birmingham. There's a couple of other bits and bobs as well. The Leicester line. Hey up, you're right. Excellent. So the Leicester line ran up to Leicester, although that's the only bit of the Grand Union Canal which isn't habitually called the Grand Union Canal, which is odd because its original name was the Grand Union Canal. Now then, the Warwick and Birmingham Canal was finished before the Warwick and Knapton Canal, and so this is simply going down to the terminus of the Warwick and Birmingham Canal. So this is the mainline canal where it ended when it was built. Incredibly shortly afterwards, the Warwick and Knapton Canal joined in, like a matter of months later, joined in back where we were at Budbrook Junction. And so, whilst this is technically the original terminus, it was only that for a matter of months, and has effectively been an arm ever since. Now, walking down here, it looks incredibly pleasant, and it's lovely, and it's very picturesque, and that is almost exclusively due to the hard work of the Saltisford Canal. I think it's the Society, or the Trust, or something like that. Anyway, the point is that, there you go, the Saltisford Canal Trust. They put in an incredible amount of work to make this nice, but it wasn't always so. Let's walk down and have a look. Here, about a third of the way down the arm as it stands, is a winding hole. I'm not sure how much the boats that are moored here and here would be delighted by your using it as a winding hole, but nevertheless a winding hole it is. And this whole area is just really nicely restored and landscaped, and has some old lock gates being nice little booths with seats to sit in, and a swan having a sunbathe, and various other bits and bobs. Had you come down here in the 1950s, this would have been a very, very different site. It would not have had a narrowboat on display. It would not have had lovely grass. It would have been grimy and industrial, and the home of various different factories, including chemical works. So that would have been delightful. Now, let's walk down to the end of the arm, and then we'll talk about why the end of the arm is where it is. So here, the arm comes to an abrupt end. Rather nicely, they've made the visitor moorings right at the end of the arm, which I think is rather cool. So often on these private arms, you know, they're sort of no visitors, no coming down here, it's our own little community, you get lost. But they're very, very welcoming down here. Although, admittedly, I'm not going to come on more here because it is 15 quid a night, which is 15 quid that I don't have, as it happens. However, the Arm used to carry on through that, I think that's a bat flight training centre, more or less, underneath the railway, which is there, and the bridge is still there, and onwards for another 300 or 400 yards until it came to a basin behind what I think is now the Anchor pub and certainly a Sainsbury's. And of course, we all know the story about how these canals, you know, get abandoned and filled in, don't we? The standard story is that, you know, in the 1950s or early 1960s, nobody can see any use for the canals apart from a few nutters like the Inland Waterways Association, and miles and miles and miles of them just get abandoned, left to go fallow and filled in. Well, sort of. Not here. Here, the Arm was left to go slightly fallow, but it was still more or less navigable right up to the late 1970s. It was the 1980s when they absolutely should have known better, when they decided to fill in a big chunk of it and build a housing estate on the line. Real act of vandalism, especially as the basin at the end would have been an absolutely brilliant ending to this Arm. And look how nice this chunk is. The whole chunk could have been brilliant. Sadly, in the 1980s, Thatcher was in power, and money was everything. Now, I'm afraid you're going to have to make do with some photographs of the basin. It's actually incredibly rare to find photographs of the basin. I could find 6, and they were only there because they were taken of the buildings around the basin being knocked down in the 1960s, which is a bit sad, but there you go. So here are some photographs of the basin. On the way up, we note that there is approximately a third of a narrowboat. This is a narrowboat that was called Chiltern. It was a Fellows Morton and Clayton narrowboat. So Fellows Morton and Clayton were like the big carriers of the early 20th century. So they were very, very late on in the canal timeline, and they managed to struggle on until about 1946 when they collapsed. This one was a motorboat. You can tell by the fact that it doesn't have a big wooden tiller. It's a relatively small rudder, and of course you can see the gland for the propeller to come out the back. I don't know what happened to the rest of the boat, but broadly speaking, what normally happened to Fellows Morton and Clayton boats is that it got broken up. I mean, in any case, wooden narrowboats or composite narrowboats only ever had a lifespan of, 20 or 30 years. So maybe that's what happened to it. Who knows? I'll have a look on the historic register and see if I can find out. Scattered around the Saltisford Arm are quite a lot of these. Now what these are icebreakers. So please note the big, chunky, thick stem post. And what you do is you get a horse or two on it and you tow it at vast speed onto the ice. And you have some men standing in the middle holding onto a big beam and they rock it backwards and forwards as hard as they possibly can. And then that breaks up the ice, and then you tow it forward another 20 or so feet and repeat. And there's a few of these kicking around the Saltisford Arm. I think it's rather nice that they're here. Brilliant. So this arm could so easily have become or shared the same fate as the Buckingham Canal or other bits and bobs of the canal system, but it hasn't. It is a beautiful, albeit nothing like its working life, but a beautiful place to be, with some really nice boats, and I'm told run by really friendly people. And I can quite well see why there is a years and years and years long waiting list to get a mooring here. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this little walk down the Saltisford Arm. There's a reason I didn't bring my boat up here, by the way, and that's because in that direction, in about half a mile, there's the Hatton Lock Flights. 21 locks, redesigned in the 1930s with incredibly heavy paddles that was the best one in the world. I am not single-handing up. So, with that said, have a lovely evening. I shall see you next time, and goodbye.